Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new UDM-SE. This device just came out of early access. It is now generally available, and this is the sort of improved successor to the UDM-Pro. So now you have two different choices in this sort of one U Dream Machine rack mount form factor. The UDM-SE improves upon the original UDM-Pro in a number of ways. We're going to talk about all of that in the video. We're also going to take a look inside the UDM-SE to see how the hardware compares to the older version. In terms of pricing, the UDM-SE is $499 versus the original UDM-Pro, which is $379. So we're going to go ahead and get the UDM-SE taken out of the box, but if you haven't done so already, make sure you like this video and click subscribe down below for 2 to 3 brand new tech videos every single week. Also, you can follow Crosstalk Solutions on Twitter at CrosstalkSOL for all of the latest updates. All right, I'm excited. Let's get this thing unboxed. Okay, here is the UDM-SE itself, also known as the UniFi Dream Machine SE. SE, of course, standing for Sherwood Edition, as an homage to the Crosstalk Solutions channel. Comes with a power cord, and this is interesting. It's not a regular rubberized power cord. It's a kind of a braided power cord. That's a nice touch. These are probably the rack mount, or the hardware kit, screws and whatnot. And then we have some rack mount ears. Of course, if you're using Ubiquiti's 6U toolless rack, you don't need the rack mount ears for that, but I'm going to be putting this in a 15U nave point rack, so I will be using those ears. All right, I've got a little label here so that I can tell these two devices apart. Let's take a look around this device. We're going to start in the back here. So in the back, we have our RPS port. So this is for the USP RPS, or redundant power system. It's not a battery backup. It's basically like a secondary power supply that can power a number of the UniFi devices, including the UDM-Pro, the UDM-SE, as well as some of the more like higher end switches. Over here we have our standard power port, and then coming around the front, we have the same 1.3-inch touchscreen that we have on all of the Ubiquiti or the UniFi gear. We have our hard drive bay for installing a hard drive. Now, one of the advantages of the UDM-SE is that it does come with an integrated 128 gigabyte SSD, which I believe is solely used for Protect video storage, so surveillance camera storage. But 128 gigs is really not a ton of space. So even if you're recording with just, 1 or 2 cameras at standard HD, 1080p definition, you're gonna fill up that 128 gigs pretty quickly. So I would certainly recommend updating this to a bigger drive, maybe like an 8 terabyte Western Digital Purple or something like that, if you're gonna be heavily utilizing the UniFi Protect surveillance features of this box. Then we have our 8 ports. Now this is another one of the big advantages to the UDM-SE, and one of the biggest complaints that I heard about the UDM-Pro. So again, for all of you complainers out there, they've fixed your issue. They've listened and fixed your issue, but of course, this costs a lot more because it costs more money to add PoE ports to the 8 network ports up front. So these are all standard RJ45 gigabit ports. The front 2 ports right here are 802.3 AT PoE+, and these other 6 ports here are just standard 802.3 AF PoE. Now another difference is the WAN port that you have right here is now a 2.5 gigabit WAN port versus the WAN port on the original UDM, which is a standard gigabit RJ45 WAN port. And then we have our 2 10 gig fiber SFP plus ports. Finally, the last little thing is our reset button. That is to factory reset the device. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is pop the case on this guy open and take a look at the innards and then compare them to the innards of the original UDM-Pro. All right, UDM-Pro and UDM-SE opened and sitting side by side so we can compare the innards of these two devices. One thing that I noticed right off the bat, even before I opened it up, is the UDM-SE has a nice little extra feature. And you see this right here, it is a lock for the power cord, right? So the special power cord that they give you has this little notch on the side such that when it's plugged in, you can then lock it in the back. The UDM-Pro does not have this. Although I do have a very old version of UDM-Pro. Maybe it's possible they've added it since I've had this one, but yeah, as of the version that I have, we do not have that sort of locking power supply feature. So taking a look inside the box here, the first thing that you notice right off the bat is there is a lot more going on with the UDM-SE than in the original UDM-Pro. I mean, just look over here, sort of this section, you can look at the circuit board, look how much extra stuff is over here versus over here, let alone anything else. So let's go through this sort of step by step. And now I'm not an expert at all of the various components that are inside this box, but for those of you who are experts, maybe you can point out some of these differences that I missed and put them down in the comments below. So I'm gonna start over here with the power adapter. The power section for these two devices is much, much bigger in the UDM-SE. I assume that's to compensate for the power over Ethernet ports that it needs to supply power to, but just look at the size of this power board over here versus the one on the UDM-Pro. Second, for the 1.3-inch display driver, it looks like a very similar board, but it is different. So this one has a blue backing on it, and it's got sort of chips in different little areas, whereas the old UDM-Pro is a green circuit board and not as much going on with this one. Like this one has like an extra little, looks like a micro SD power connector. Yeah, that looks like a micro SD power connector hanging off the side of this circuit board, whereas this one does not have a micro SD power connector. So interesting that they have improved the circuit board that drives the 1.3-inch touchscreen display in the front. One thing that has stayed the same is they have this sort of airflow channel where we have an exhaust fan behind the hard drive cage, and we have an exhaust fan over here which blows through this heatsink, and then it sort of directs all of the air from either of these exhausts out to the back over here. I think it's actually out across the entire back of the device. I think there's sort of holes open across the whole back. Moving on to the sort of main motherboard or component board, we have just so much more going on over here. We have a power connector here. This is going to be for the PoE board, which is sitting on top over here. Notice there's no PoE board on the UDM-Pro. We have a couple of extra components here, capacitors and whatnot. Then here we have our 128 gig SSD. This is a Kingston SSD, really nice little small like M.2 form factor on that SSD. We've got the same heatsink here, and then above on the UDM-SE we have this extra sort of raised circuit board that has what I believe are all of the components necessary for managing PoE out to the 8 PoE ports which sit right in front of that board. So there you go, a look inside both of these devices. Again, if you have anything to point out about the differences between these two, put that down in the comments below. I'm sure that will be helpful for everyone. UDM-SE has been plugged in, and the first thing the 1.3-inch touchscreen asks you to do is plug in your WAN connection, so I have done that here. I plugged into the RJ45 WAN port. And then really you can actually set this up in one of two ways. You can set it up by utilizing the UniFi app. So it found the device, it says Dream Machine Special Edition, ready to set up, or as I have on my screen here, you can go to the IP address of the machine, which is 192.168.1.1, and then it redirects you to UniFi/setup/privacy and security, which basically says our goal is to keep as much of your data off cloud, yada, yada, yada. So we're gonna say setup UDM-SE. The first thing we want to do is give it a name. UDM-SE works fine for me. We're going to say next. And then how do you want to use this? Personal or business? So in my case, I'm just going to choose personal. Now, I've been over this before with the original UDM-Pro. I'm not sure what the differences are between these two settings, but you know, listen, if you're setting this up at home, choose personal. If you're setting it up for work, choose business. Okay, we're going to click next. Now it wants us to sign in with our UI.com account credentials. And notice also that at this point, I'm running a ping and I do not have internet access. So this is not going to allow me to actually get internet access. So the device itself has internet access, but it doesn't seem like it has activated any of the routing capabilities yet. So let's go ahead and sign into UI.com. And now it wants to know the update schedule. So how often are we checking for security and performance updates? By default, it says check daily at 3 a.m. I'm actually going to disable this because I like to run updates manually just so that I know if there's anything that's not working after an update, it is as a result of the update that I just ran, rather than sort of getting up in the morning and walking into work or walking into my office and nothing's working and I don't know that it ran an update the night before. So I like to make sure that I do all of my updates manually. Your mileage may vary though, you can set it to whatever you like. Basic configuration for your console, auto optimize, I'm just gonna leave it on that setting and click next, and now it says starting speed tests. All right, so test results, 712 megabit down, 42 megabit up. That is, I think, what I pay for. Actually, I think I pay for like 600 by 40, but I'll take 700, no problem. And I'm just gonna leave the defaults that were auto-detected by the speed test, and we're gonna say next. And now it wants us to review our configuration. Everything looks good to me here, so we're gonna say finish. Okay, and here we are now brought to the home screen of UniFi OS. Let's go over to our system settings. And the first thing I want to do here is check for updates. So we're going to say updates, and there are updates available. So notice we have 2.3.11 version of the UniFi OS, and we also have updates for each of the network and protect, as well as access. Now Talk says failed to start application, and UID is not installed. So let's just go ahead and run our base OS update first and click confirm, and then we'll come back and run the rest of our updates once this is completed. Okay, we are now up to date on version 2.3.11, and that also updated both network and protect. So let's take a quick look around here. Clicking on general is going to show us general information about the UDM-SE, and if we scroll down, it says internal storage 5.71 gigs, which is interesting because the two drives that come with this thing are a 16 gigabyte eMMC drive as well as the Kingston 128 gigabyte SSD, and neither of those look like those drives. My guess is that this is the 16 gig drive. Maybe it's just a smaller partition that UniFi OS runs on. We can click on notifications and manage our various UniFi OS notifications. Updates is where we ran updates. Location time allows us to set location and time settings for the device itself. And if we click on advanced, we have the ability to rename the console, turn on SSH, enable remote access, which is the cloud access from unifi.ui.com. Basically, this is saying if we have remote access enabled, we can go to unifi.ui.com from anywhere in the world and then log in and see this device and manage it from the cloud. And then we have some of the restart, power off, factory reset types of settings below. Okay, going back to the dashboard. Right now, I don't really have any devices installed, so I'm going to click on Network. And from here, I can see information about my WAN, the gateway IP. This is just straight up UniFi Network. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into configuring this UDM-SE in this video. We're just showing some of the basics of how to get around the interface. I did do a complete video tutorial series on the UniFi Dream Machine that I will put a link to down in the description below. It's like 8 or 9 videos that goes through every sort of little piece of the UniFi Dream Machine to get it set up from start to finish with best practices in mind. So check out that series if you're interested in really how to dig in and configure the Dream Machine. So there's Network. Let's pop over to Protect. And here we can see, okay, so this is interesting. So here's our storage utilization. Now notice, I do not have a hard drive in the hard drive bay. I'm not sure the maximum size drive it can hold, but I think 8 terabytes would be about right for the UDM. But if you do not have that 8 terabyte drive, that is where you're gonna use this 128 gigabyte internal storage. So you can see it right there, 128 gigs. If I put in a hard drive into the hard drive tray, the UDM-SE is going to recognize that drive and it will use that drive for Protect storage instead. However, let me go ahead and hook up a camera and an access point to this thing so we can actually see that space being utilized. Okay, so I have a G3 Flex camera set up. This is a 1080p camera as well as a U6 Lite access point. Now, interestingly, when you have the 128 gigabyte internal storage only, so if you have not added an extra hard drive, it actually doesn't look like you have the ability to do always on recording at all. If I click on the camera and then I click on recording, so recording mode is set to detections. And if I pull that down, I have two options, record never or record detections. That's going to be motion detections, or if you have one of the G4 cameras that can do the person detection or the vehicle detection, I'm sure those count as detections as well. So typically you would see always on recording as well. Doesn't look like that's an option if you're using the internal storage, which actually makes a lot of sense because of the small amount of storage space that comes with the thing by default. The 128 gigabytes is not a lot of storage space for recordings. All the other settings look to be pretty standard. And let's go now into UniFi Network as well. And here we can see, if I click on devices, there we can see my U6 Lite. As far as wireless networks, nothing is actually set up yet because I have not set up UniFi Network yet on this UDM-SE. Again, if you're looking for a full in-depth tutorial series on how to set up the Dream Machine, check out my UDM-Pro complete setup series. It's based on the UDM-Pro, but it will work just the same with the UDM-SE. There's not a ton of software differences between the two. Okay, let's take a quick look at the integrated touchscreen on the UDM-SE. So we've got choices right off the front: Network, Protect, Access, which is grayed out because it's not installed, Talk, which is not installed, Settings, and then About. If we click on About, we've got System Status, your IP addressing information, temperature, uptime, hardware version, and then disk stats if we had Protect disk installed, and then our software version. If we go over to settings, we can change the screen brightness, the screen color, set the fan speeds, shut down or restart the device, and then we have this option to reset two-factor authentication, which is actually pretty interesting. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'm gonna have to look into that. Maybe I'll do that as a different video. If we look at Protect, we can see our various motion events, which there have been motion events in the last hour, so I'm not sure why this is not updated. We can see how many cameras are online versus offline, and then we can see the software version. If we go over to Network, we can see our throughput, Wi-Fi experience, which again, that's a weird metric. I never really put a lot of stock in the Wi-Fi experience metric. Our connected clients, and then the software version. Okay, so there you have it, a quick look at the UDM-SE, $499 as opposed to the UDM-Pro. And to summarize, the UDM-SE includes 8 PoE ports, 2 of them are PoE Plus ports, and 6 of them are standard PoE ports. You also get that 128 gigs of internal storage, that little Kingston M.2 drive that we saw on the inside, as well as a 2.5 gigabit WAN port instead of the standard 1 gigabit WAN port that comes on the UDM-Pro. So is it worth the extra money, I guess, is the million-dollar question. And really, I think the additional money is only worth it if you have a number of PoE devices that you would like to power up, you know, a small number of cameras, some access points, maybe a voice over IP phone or something like that, and you don't want to spend the money for an extra switch that can do the PoE for you, right? So the PoE built into this board allows you to A, not have a separate PoE switch, and B, not have to have a whole bunch of little PoE bricks lying around for all of the equipment that you need to power up with Power over Ethernet. Or the other reason to upgrade to the UDM-SE is if your internet connection is greater than 1 gigabit. I would almost say if it's 1 gigabit or greater, because if you are exactly at 1 gigabit, you want to make sure that you have the most amount of throughput possible for your gigabit internet connection. As you saw with mine, I have a 600 megabit connection, but I was able to pull down about 700 megabits. So if you have a 1 gigabit NIC and a 1 gigabit internet connection, you'll never go above that sort of 1 gigabit top speed, even if your ISP allows for a little bit of overage there. So certainly if you have a bigger than 1 gigabit internet connection, or if you want those PoE ports, this is definitely a good upgrade for an extra 120 bucks versus the standard UDM-Pro. Okay, so there you have it. What are your thoughts on the UDM-SE? Put those down in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please click subscribe. My name is Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.